Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today, Chip Fridrich. We will talk Vanderbilt baseball. This episode sponsored by the Well Coffee House, which is a Nashville area coffee house, providing fresh roasted coffee along with house-made pastries, breakfast, and lunch offerings. 5 locations to serve you in the Nashville area: Brentwood, Green Hills, downtown, Bellevue, and Cool Springs Lifeway. More information can be found at wellcoffeehouse.org. The Well Coffee House, where coffee changes lives. Thanks to our co-sponsor, Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center, which is located in the Gulch as well. Our news presented by Sutherland and Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in any type of accident, call Taylor or Russell at 615-846-6200. See what your rights are and if they can help. Vanderbilt wins the regular season title in baseball. Commodores sweep Kentucky and end up winning the division and the overall standings. Vanderbilt gets the number 1 seed in the Southeastern Conference Tournament, which starts in Hoover, Alabama on Tuesday. Vanderbilt will not play until Wednesday because of the double bye. Big honors for the Commodores in the postseason all-star teams, too. J.J. Bleday was named the Southeastern Conference Player of the Year. Austin Martin, Philip Clark, and Tyler Brown also earned first-team All-SEC honors. Our guest line today, brought to you by Boll & Branch, started by Vanderbilt graduates Scott and Missy Tannen. I've slept on their sheets for years. They're incredible. I had no clue how comfortable those were until I got them, and I've not slept on anything since. These are fair trade certified, which means they're made under safe conditions by men and women who are treated fairly. Try them for a month. You can return them for free, but you won't want to. If you have the sheets, try the mattress. That was voted the best mattress of 2018. Go to bollandbranch.com. That's spelled B-O-L-L. Enter the promo code Vandy to get $50 off your first set. Chip Fridrich joins us now. Chip, good weekend for Vanderbilt baseball. The Commodores win the SEC in not as close a fashion as I think we expected. The Commodores got some great honors today in the All-SEC teams that were released. Just a really good weekend for Vanderbilt baseball. Thank you for joining us today.
Sure, Chris. Yeah, I mean, great, good weekend, good week, good month. Goodness, you're talking about a team that has been red hot for the last couple of weeks. So they are playing exactly the way Tim Corbin and the staff want them to be playing here. And, the only fear is, if you're kind of the negative Nancy, is that, you hope they haven't peaked. And we all hearken back to that 2013 season when this pretty similar, not, it's hard to win 27 games in the conference. And this team, if they had beaten Tennessee when they should have, and they'd beaten Arkansas, they would have gotten pretty dadgum close. But you just hope that they can keep it hot and keep things going. And as you said, big day for the Commodores with some very prestigious awards as far as first team All-SEC and Coach of the Year, and very well deserving.
The peaking too soon thing always cracks me up, because how do we know? I mean, if you'd said 2 weeks ago, okay, they peaked, well, then they win another 8 of 9 at that point. And how do we know that this doesn't turn into, 30 of 32 or 33 or something like that? So that there's that, first of all. I mean, I think you want to be playing well going into Hoover, and they are. So I don't really get into the whole trying to time a hot streak thing, as if you could do that. But they've looked awfully good, man. They finished plus 102 in runs scored this year. There are the pitching issues. Again, they popped up. We'll talk about those in a minute. But this is a dominant team, man. They lost 10 games in the regular season. I mean, I think one thing that nobody's talked about enough, Chip, they lost one midweek game, and they darn near won that. They lost it by 1. That is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and I've said before in these podcasts and discussions with you and with those who follow Vanderbilt baseball, if you're going to get a national seed, if that's your goal. And I think, there's winning the SEC regular season championship, and there's winning the tournament championship. But you talk to anybody off the record, probably tell you it's all about getting to Omaha and having a chance to win the national championship if you're a team that is fueled like this team. And if you're going to do that, you got to win your midweek games. And this team definitely took care of that. I mean, you look at the comparisons from this year to last year, how they did, and it's not even close. It's a joke. I mean, the difference between how they performed midweek. And that's a start as far as getting that national seed, which they're going to get. And it's probably going to be a 1 or 2. And this team did that. So, and, and to harken back on what you said about peaking, it's this, that 2013 team, there were some whispers that team had really just, there was all this, it's probably self-pressure that they're going after the regular season record as far as conference wins. And I think a lot of effort and energy was placed in that. And and of course, every team has a different personality, right? I mean, that was Yastrzemski and that group and Kemp. And you had some guys who were some unique personalities, not in a bad way, but that was a scenario where I think they put a lot of energy in that regular season title and getting the record. And then when the regionals rolled around, the SEC tournament and then the super regional, I think that team was just flat out tired, not to mention they played a red hot Louisville team. So yeah, I mean, it's good time of the year to be a Commodore, and hopefully they can keep things going. And, but yeah, winning the midweek games like they did was a start that they're going to be rewarded. Now, hopefully with the definition of being rewarded, we've seen the NCAA do some crazy things as far as placing some teams. I just hope we don't get Clemson. I mean, I'm sure Clemson doesn't want Vanderbilt either, but there's been some goofy things that the NCAA does, and I'm sure we'll get into that as well.
Well, the NCAA got called out last year for putting Clemson and St. John's and Vandy in the same regional again. Did not realize it. Now, they make another kind of mistake in that regard. I mean, I say it's a mistake. I don't know if it was a mistake, but it was what it was. And I think that's probably not going to happen again. In fact, I think Clemson will get sent to Athens. I think that's the closest place for Clemson to go. So I think if Clemson makes it, that's where Clemson will go. But back to the 2013 season, yeah, there's some parallels there that people I think have thought of. That team won 14 in a row, and then it lost a 10-inning game to Alabama on the last weekend series of the year in Nashville. It was only the third loss of the year. That was in 10 innings. And the next game, Vanderbilt goes and wins 14-10, and probably the worst pitch game it had all year. Then it goes to the SEC tournament, loses to A&M, wins 3 in a row, then loses to LSU in the tournament finale. So that was 3 losses right there in 6 games, which was uncharacteristic of that team. Then it loses a game to Georgia Tech in its regional, and then it ends up winning that regional before losing 2 to Louisville. Yeah, I mean, I think that team certainly ran out of gas and maybe wasn't, anecdotally from some things I've heard, is focused at the end of the year. So far, we haven't seen any cracks or warning signs with this team, and I think this team is at least deeper from an offensive standpoint too.
Yeah, and you've got some senior leadership that's definitely been a part of this club, getting the amount of wins they have, and their demeanor has been admirable. I think, Corbin, when a Tim Corbin coach team, when Tim Corbin states that it's kind of the basketball analogy of you just roll the ball out there and let them play. He said that in an interview, not those type words, but he did say, sometimes you just let them go out there and play. And sometimes you got to remind them. He made the analogy of driving a car. You got to remind them that they got to stop at the stop sign every once in a while. And that's when you have the talent that he has amassed and the way that talent has performed this year. It's got to be, something that as a coach is a dream, that you can do that because you're not worrying about, it looks like there's no behavior problem. There's guys, they're not misbehaving. They're super uber focused. And I plan on just seeing this team develop as they go on. And, if someone's going to out Vanderbilt in this tournament, and I'm not really talking about the SEC tournament, but as far as the NCAA tournament, it's going to have to be someone who is playing above and beyond their best baseball of the season.
Anything stand out to you, good, bad, and different in Lexington?
Oh, the game one, it almost started off, in a weird way to say, too well. I mean, it was 9-0 before you could blink in the third inning. And then you have the, Fellows falters and gives up 5 earned runs, and then Franklin falters and gives up 3, and then Hugh Fisher comes in and throws an inning, and he gives up 2. And so you're talking about 10 earned runs within those 3 guys. And it was a little disappointing, I think. That's not the kind of effort you want not the effort, but the result you want if your fellow's going in the last weekend after he was just cruising there for the first 4 innings. And then he hits the 5th and the wheels come off. A.J. Franklin, who, pitched really well against Louisville. And I think people's expectations are, who's this guy? And then he gets the last 2 outings he's thrown and has not been up to par with what that was in Louisville. So he had a disappointing, third of an inning. And then Hugh Fisher didn't do too well, though he bounced back later in the week. But the Friday weekend, the Friday game 1 was, just caused a little bit of pause. But, you turn around and this team, and I've talked about it ad nauseum, they respond and just bury Kentucky with a 5 spot in the 9th. And that's what you like to see. You're going to have blips in the radar as you go along. And that's what you like to see from a team that's heading into the tournament. Other than that, my goodness, what a weekend Stephen Scott had on the positive side. He gets named SEC Player of the Week, and deservingly so. And it's good to have a guy in that 6th spot who can play offensively as well as he did, and I was happy to see that. But as far as anything causing for concern, it's the Friday night. I think they kind of looked over their shoulder, and I heard Joe Fisher said a couple times, here we go, almost a here we go again attitude like they had on Saturday when they referred back to Friday night. But I think it was a very workmanlike outing. The team was very businesslike. They got the job done against a team that Kentucky had everything to play for, although, they would have to win the SEC tournament to go anywhere. But a team that, for the youth that they had and some injuries, they were really playing for something, and Vanderbilt really wasn't playing for anything. And they just stepped on the throat at the end and kept the Cats out of the tournament.
Did you change your mind about anything with the bullpen this week? And Fisher wasn't as good as you mentioned. Franklin wasn't as good as you mentioned. Jake Eater was really good this week, had 4 scoreless innings. We hadn't seen much of him. In fact, we hadn't seen him at all, I think, since the Auburn series. And then you had Zach King jump up and throw pretty well for a couple innings. Do you process how you think about the bullpen any differently after what you saw this week?
Oh, I sent you a text, and I told you about, my feelings as far as Zach King. And you've heard me for the last couple of weeks talk about him. And I was very pleased to see the way he threw. He was confident. He had a lot of energy about him. He threw 2 innings. I was glad to see that Corbin let him finish the game. You thought that possibly that Tyler Brown would have gotten the ball in that game 1, but he didn't, and I'm glad he did. I think he wanted to instill confidence in Zach King, and he did, hopefully. He was very energized, and when he got the 2 strikeouts, the one at the end of one of the frames. So that was a pleasant surprise. They got to get him going, man. They've got to get him to the point in coming into this tournament. They're going to need a Zach King to fill a role here. I've talked about Gillis, and I know he got up in the bullpen once yesterday, but didn't get in. But if one of those 2 guys having that big body and throwing in the low 90s, I think that that's a good thing, and it's going to bode well for their not only SEC tournament but beyond. They got to have a guy like that. They cannot have a wasted arm like him, and that was a surprise of the weekend. So hopefully he can continue that and get some bullpen sessions this week and get ready for the SEC tournament, because he's going to get some action. I'm telling you, they're not going to waste and throw anybody early. So you could see Zach King throw as early as Wednesday, Thursday, and we'll see what he got. What he has as far as going forward. But yeah, that was a surprise, and a good surprise to see. Tyler Brown was steady, and the other 2 guys you mentioned, it wasn't. You had Fisher didn't do too well on Friday night. Eater comes in on Saturday, but it was good to see just some consistency. You're seeing the normal guys rolling out there. You're not seeing too much deviation in who, as far as Scott Brown's throwing out there on the hill.
Did you make anything of when they threw King? It was game 1. Vanderbilt had just blown that big lead not long before that. And at that point, the SEC championship was still up for grabs. It's one thing if you throw King, say, on Sunday with the big lead. It's another thing to throw him in that spot where they had not assured themselves of winning anything yet.
Yeah, I agree. That was a pivotal moment there, and it showed that I think Brown and Corbin are willing to, give the guy some more chances, and that's great. And it puts him in. It was a pressure-filled situation, and it gets his confidence up. And sometimes you have to do that. You got to feel it out as a coach and say, is he going to respond, and we're going to give him another chance to do this here. So it works wonders when it works, when that strategy works, and I think it did here. Again, I will say this: it would have been easy to pitch King, get in the inning, get him out of there. Hey, no harm done, and then you push Tyler Brown in and get the save. But again, he did not do that, and that was probably just as much a more constant confidence boost that they did for Zach King, that they let him go out there for the second inning. King, if you remember, has been the Friday night kind of stopgap, the middle relief guy for several weeks up until that point of the Georgia series, I believe, when that kind of halted. And so he was the guy who kind of finished it off, albeit he wasn't the first guy. He was the last. But it would have been easier to do that and put him in on Sunday when it meant nothing. But it showed me a little something about challenging him that they did that on Friday night.
One more thing before we jump to Hoover and how Vanderbilt might attack that. You talked about Stephen Scott winning Player of the Week. The All-SEC teams drive me bananas. Antoine Duplantis is a really good player, has had a great career at LSU. Him making All-SEC over Scott is an absolute joke. I run things on how much you produce per 27 outs. Scott created about 4 more runs per 27 outs than Duplantis did, which is that's not even close. I think that he really got jobbed in all SEC voting. The rest of it I did not have a problem with. I thought Clark deserved first team at catcher. Martin obviously deserved first team at third, and same with Blade. And right now I would have flipped Martin and Blade as players of the year. And I thought Brown rightfully was first team reliever too, but I thought Scott getting left off that team was inexcusable.
Yeah, I agree with you, Chris. He should be on that team. He had an incredible year as far as the regular season, hitting 335 and doing what he did. And, correct me if I'm wrong. Is that the coaches' SEC team, or was that voted on by the media? How was that?
I think it was coaches. I think it's coaches. Okay. Well, it came from the SEC office. So,
well, everybody wants their guy, and it gets political, and you have coaches who they look at it and they want their guy to get the recognition, and I just don't. I think that's the big miss there. Of course, everyone's going to claim that they had one or two that didn't get it, but all in all, it's interesting when you have Austin Martin, the third baseman, but of course his offensive numbers. Not that he really got better towards the end of the year as far as defensively, but you're talking about a guy who did not start out at third base. He was a second baseman, and he was an outfielder last year. And he's first team All-SEC third baseman, and that might not be where he plays at the next level. So, you got to put him somewhere, and just goes to show you that he was deserving of he and Blade and that trio is deserving of everything they got. And of course, Tim Corbin too. When you've had a string of winning seasons and success, sometimes it gets to the point where you'll give it to somebody else because of one factor or another. A coach maybe that has brought their team up from the dead and is not playing, has a miracle season. You give it to that guy instead of the guy who's always there. And that just goes to show the respect of the league that they have and what a dominant year it was for this team.
Let's talk about Hoover. I've not seen anything from Vanderbilt announcing a starting pitcher for Wednesday. I would presume that would be Mason Hickman.
I would think so. It sets up that way, it sets up. This team has 4 starters, and if you set it up, you would go just the way they've been going right in a row and treat it like a midweek game like it is. You'd go, Hickman, Fellows, Rocker, Raby, with Raby in the championship. Now, it doesn't work all that way, of course. There's going to be some bumps in the road, and you've got your Zach Kings of the world who could start. You've got some other guys who could fill in. But in a perfect world, you just play it 1, 2, 3, 4 and go that way. And that's the beauty of having a bye. Now, if you didn't have a bye and you're playing on Tuesday, then you're piecing stuff together throughout the tournament and you're pitching. That's when those people on Tuesday, those teams end up, if they ever get to Sunday, they're pitching a guy, like me, who didn't pitch all that much as far as the starting basis, and you're throwing him out there. We've seen that before, haven't we? Where a guy who's thrown 10, 12 innings all year, mainly in relief, is getting the start in the championship game, and that's when you got to piece it together. But I would think they would their plan is to go 1, 2, 3, 4 like they have. Don't change anything. You're not losing any rest. Your fellow's pitched on Thursday night. He gets a week rest just like he always does. Everybody else gets a week, and you just fall right in. So I think that's the way they'll go.
Well, the matchup is never easy, and Tennessee not a team that I think if you're Vanderbilt is at the top of your list to see. But I think the teams you didn't want to see were Texas A&M and Missouri for sure in that first game. They avoided those, and maybe LSU just because of how many people LSU brings. But Vanderbilt battered Auburn's pitching.
I wouldn't want to see Florida.
Well, the way Florida's playing right now too, that's a good point. But Vanderbilt battered around Auburn's pitching staff pretty good in Nashville. Tennessee will be without Garrett Crochet, who really shut Vanderbilt down. He broke his jaw, is done for the year from what I understand. So you go to Tuesday, you got Tennessee down one of its best arms, and a game less fresh than Vanderbilt. Let's say you win that one, and let's say that Mississippi State wins its game with either LSU or South Carolina. I guess State throws Ethan Small in that spot, which isn't a bad place to be. Now, it's not a good place if you want to win the tournament if you're Vanderbilt, but what it does is now you get to see how you handle the SEC Pitcher of the Year potentially. I'm presuming that's where they'd go. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but one more big test before you get to NCAA play, if that's how it plays out.
Yeah, and I hope that I would think that that's what they want. This is you want to go down there and win it, and they're not going to go to do any extraordinary means and pitching guys on short rest and to do it. But that would be a great matchup there as far as the gate and for TV and everything you have it. But looking at the bracket. Florida's got to be your sleeper, in my opinion, the way they played this weekend. That just, you can't count a Florida team out. I know they're young, and I know they struggled this year, but they're playing for their lives, and I could see those guys winning a few games down there. And then you've got the teams that are kind of in trouble. Missouri, I think, is in trouble if they don't win some games, and they got a tough game with an elimination game with Ole Miss. The Tennessee-Auburn game is taking on a new twist in that opening round because I think Auburn's in a little bit of trouble, Chris. I don't think they're a sure thing, and I'm not saying it's an elimination game because Tennessee won 2 out of 3 as far as elimination for the NCAA tournament. Tennessee kind of stamped their ticket, I think, with their RPI and winning at home 2 of 3. But there's some intriguing matchups early in that first game where some people are going to go home, and we've seen what happens. We saw it happen to Kentucky a few years ago when they lost their opening game and they were on kind of eggshells there and they didn't make it. And you got Missouri, who I think it's an elimination game for Missouri, to be honest, when you're talking about a team that just got swept. They're under 500 in the conference. They're 13-16. They're 13 games over on the overall record, but they fell out of the top 25 this week when they got swept. So I don't know your thoughts, but I kind of have my ins and my question marks and my outs, and it's pretty evident that, of course, Alabama is out and they're not there, and you've got Kentucky and South Carolina, unless South Carolina wins the whole thing. So you really got Missouri, Florida. I think Tennessee's okay. I think Ole Miss is playing for a host if they got to win some games, though, and then Auburn's a big question mark. So very intriguing first day or two for the tournament.
Here's my thoughts on where the league is and who is playing for what. Vanderbilt's going to be the 1 or 2 national seed, barring something just bizarre. I think you've got Arkansas, Mississippi State, and Georgia, barring something really crazy, are all going to be national seeds. You've got Texas A&M and LSU are in the tournament, even if they don't win down there. And I think LSU is in position to maybe host, and same with A&M. Get a couple of wins down in Hoover, and you're probably hosting regionals. From there, I think Tennessee has clinched a bid no matter what, just with its RPI. I think Ole Miss, with winning 15 games in the conference, has also clinched. Although Kendall Rogers, I think it was, brought up something interesting. The NCAA looks at games in your conference and record, and I think Ole Miss lost a game or two or a couple games to Mississippi State. So it's, I guess, technically 15-17 in the SEC. I don't think a team, though, with 15 regular season wins has ever been left outside. Ole Miss and Tennessee are going to be in. Although Tennessee only had 14, it's got enough on the rest of its resume. So I think had Missouri just won one more game and it got swept by Florida, which I couldn't believe, Missouri would be in. I think you may be right. I think it may have to beat Ole Miss to get in. I think that from there, Florida, I don't know. I think Florida's got to do some damage because its record against the top 25 was pretty miserable on the whole. The SEC could have done itself some more favors with the way the games played out this weekend, but I think that Florida sweeping Missouri in particular was very damaging.
Yeah, and you've got 7 teams in the top 25, with Missouri being the 8th that was in there last week, and they drop out. And that's about normal, but I mean, you go 2nd, 3rd, 5th, and 7th of the top 10 are SEC teams, and that's pretty impressive. But yeah, that Missouri Ole Miss game is intriguing when you talk about that elimination game, because if you're Ole Miss, you lose, you don't host. If you're Missouri, you lose, you probably don't go. And I think Ole Miss, that is an event down there. If you've never been there, anyone listening to that regional, they put it on big time. There's 11, 12,000 people there. There's tailgating and barbecue and throwing beers up in the outfield, and they put on a show. And I know the NCAA would love to have a regional down there, but you got to earn it. And so I think there's some work to be done. But I think I got a feeling Ole Miss wins that game. I think that if they feel, they play well down at Hoover. It means a lot to them. They have done well the last couple of years, and they bring a pretty decent crowd. So I think they got a lot to play for, and especially coming off that performance this weekend in Knoxville, I think they'll be a little more energized.
Forgot to mention Auburn. I think Auburn is going to get in regardless, but it did lose a midweek game to Alabama that did not count in the SEC standings, but will count on that record against league teams. That may be something to watch, but I think strength of schedule and maybe some injuries, if they get some guys back. I guess injuries won't be a factor because they've lost some guys from the year, so maybe that won't matter. Oddly enough, I mean, you could see, I guess Florida, if it gets to the weekend, would probably get in. I mean, really what you want to see for your league, you want to see Missouri win a game or two. You want to see Auburn win a game just in case. And I guess that's about it. I mean, you could, if everything breaks right, you could see 11 teams in the NCAA field. I think it's unlikely, but it was mentioned this week at D1 Baseball.
Yeah, and I think Florida's got to do some work. I mean, they get a quality win if they win the first one, they beat Georgia, so that would be a feather in their cap. And then if they get to the weekend, but you might see O'Sullivan do some things that he wouldn't normally do because he's not used to playing on day one. But as far as pitching, and just roll it out there and try to get some wins, and then hope that the wins are quality as far as that's concerned. Another intriguing thing, I mentioned that UT Auburn game. Auburn swept UT in Knoxville this year, took 3 games in Knoxville. That's pretty. So you wonder if how that's going to play into it. I forgot about that earlier in the day when I was thinking about that series. So you wonder if that's some extra motivation for Tennessee, or it's some confidence on the other side for Auburn.
Yeah, I remember last year one team swept another team early in the SEC season, and then there was a different outcome in the postseason. But we won't bring that up.
No.
On Vanderbilt's end, let's go over some storylines. You mentioned the Gillis King one. I think that's maybe the biggest thing because, again, it's nice to win a title, but they don't have a lot to prove at this point. It's not going to much change their seeding. I mean, I guess if they go down and win in Hoover, it's going to be hard to keep them away from the number 1 national seed. It's also going to be hard to drop them beyond 2. What are the things that you were kind of keeping your eye on from a Vanderbilt standpoint in Hoover?
I just think how the pitching staff's handled, and whether I don't see them deviating much as far as mentioning. Now, Tim, I'll say this, and everyone who knows him and follows him and doing his career, I mean, if he's going down there to play checkers, he's going to try to win. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about it. He's shown that even in the years, you can't really look at it that he's ever tanked or thrown guys who shouldn't be throwing in certain situations, and he's going to go for it. But I don't see, as far as what I'm going to be looking for, just how they handle the staff, and I think it's going to be pretty consistent of how they've done the last couple of weeks. He's shown the blueprint, And in the best of worlds, they just go 1, 2, 3, 4 and win the thing on Sunday. But we all know that Hoover is the Bermuda Triangle for weird things happening. You're going to have rain, you're going to have heat, you're going to run into a team that's desperate and it gets on a hot streak. So it doesn't work out that way. Everybody'd like for it to work out that way, but it doesn't. So just consistency as far as how they've been playing and the guys who are hitting the ball. And it's interesting to see how Stephen Scott, how he continues his tear. It's how Hickman does tomorrow. I think that's on Wednesday, how he does as far as, he's been pitching against midweek teams, your Louisville's, which is a good team, Middle, which is not so hot. You look at his performance, the Belmonts, the Lipscombs. Now he's going to be thrown into playing some teams that are desperate and SEC teams. And how does he handle that? He's done it before. He was the number 3 pitcher last year. So interesting to see how he handles that. So that's what I'm looking for. But I don't think you're going to see, you would never be able to tell, but we have seen Tim in some of his most despondent moods after tournament games down there when he wants to get the heck out of there and get on a bus and get back to Nashville. Just the fact that it didn't go his way and that he wasn't happy with it. I think it might be a little different this year, just how well they played here of late, winning 18 of 19. It's extremely impressive.
The other storyline I've got an eye on is, do they get some everyday players a rest? I know that Tim is a person of continuity, likes to have the same 9 out there all the time, and he's found that 9. But we've mentioned they've got Jason Gonzalez, who's played exceptionally well off the bench. They've got Walker Crisanti. They've got Cooper Davis was starting until the injury. And that's the one I'm particularly watching because I think he plays well down on Hoover in terms of he gives you some speed in the outfield that Stephen Scott does not have. That's a big ballpark. And as I'm thinking through that, you talked about the 2013 team maybe running out of gas. And when you've got such good replacement players, it's a thought. But on the other hand, you also have the mercy rule down there. So like even at a spot where they might put some guys in, you wonder if they might not want to keep their foot on the gas and leave guys in where they would normally sub in order to try to get that 10 runs and get your pitching out a little fresher.
Well, and this team has scored 20-plus runs a couple of times here in the last couple of weeks. So you're right. As far as stepping on the gas, that might be something they continue to do and just do by habit. I mean, that the offensive numbers have been so potent that could very well happen. But, I ran into our friend Mitchell at a baseball game this weekend, a kid's baseball game, and he was talking about the game on Sunday and how, well, what do you think? There's nothing to play for. Do you think, Tim, that kind of like the questions you're asking? And I said, Mitch, you got to remember who we're talking about. That this is Corbin as competitive as can be. And if anything, I'm not saying he has a dislike for the Kentucky staff, but you always play for things that something that to play for. And they kept Kentucky out of the tournament. I mean, they kept Kentucky out, and that's something that, there's always something to play for in his mind. And I think the idea of resting anyone, unless it's just adamant that someone's, got a flat tire and needs some rest, he's going to go for it. Well, I think we know his personality. You know it just as well as I do. So, I've had 2 or 3 people say, well, there's just nothing to play for in game 3. And why don't they, a gentleman who's been following Vanderbilt baseball for years, my late father's age, says, why don't they just play some of the players who hadn't played all year? And I said, that ain't going to happen. It's just not the way he's wired. And you saw it this weekend. It didn't happen. So unless, it will be good to get Davis some at bats, some guys who have not played recently. And I think that's important. But anything deviating from the routine is not going to happen, I don't think, in my opinion.
Well, I think it's a spot where we have little to lose. And I think there are some things to play for. We've talked about the bullpen. Go down there and get those guys some confidence. And if you get King and Gillis and maybe Eater or somebody who had a rough weekend or Franklin throwing well, then I think you've come out of that place better than you went in.
Oh, yeah. And you look at the roster now, and a lot of people don't understand this, Chris, but it's the roster, the 35-man roster. There are some guys who've gone home, and I think you and I have talked about this in years past. I don't know exactly who those are, but there are some players who have exited, and I don't mean they're off the team, but there's summer ball that started, and there's some guys that are, you can only dress so many for the tournament. And once, and I'm not talking about half a dozen or 7 or 8, but there's usually 3 or 4 that drop off and end up going elsewhere to play summer baseball because they're not going to, they'd rather get the work in. The coaching staff they work to that decision together. So it's a smaller group, and there's a battle for being on the dress list. And not, you see those guys in the dugout and they're in shorts and t-shirt at the tournament, and there's some guys who go, but they can't play. And so there's some guys who are fighting for spots to be on the participation list for the SEC tournament and the regional. So don't think for a minute that if you're a guy who's on that bubble, that you're not going to try to bust it in workouts and in games when you get a chance to give you, to be on that spot. And that's just the competitive nature of this team, where you've got younger guys who've replaced some of the older guys. So that happens too. And you're going to see that's where you keep the competitive fires going too, is who gets to dress and who's on the participation list that's turned in before each tournament.
Chance off another guy who stands to benefit too, who we didn't mention. Well, Chip, I know that you've got a thriving real estate business. People are getting in that spot where they're ready to get out of school and maybe move for the summer. Tell folks where they can find you and what you guys do.
Sure, Chris. Fridrich and Clark Realty is our company. We've been in business for over 60 years, and we've got 2 offices, one in Green Hills and one in Brentwood, to serve our customers, over 140 agents in those 2 locations. And we've been around. We know the market. We know the statistics of the areas that you want to buy or sell. We're Vanderbilt people. All the principals are Vanderbilt graduates, so that's a plus for those who are listening, obviously, to this on vandysports.com. So we'd love to handle any of the real estate needs that your listeners would have. It's a great time to sell. It's still somewhat of a seller's market. We've got some computer technology and some programs that you can say it's a seller's market or it's a buyer's market, and people hear those terms in a broad brush. As far as the Middle Tennessee area is a seller's market right now. Well, we've got some data and some analytics that can go by zip codes, even where the tilt is favoring a buyer or seller, and that matters when you're pricing a house or you're making an offer. So give us a call. You can give me a call personally, and I'll hook you up with one of our agents that works well in your area, and we can help you out, give you some advice, some sound advice, hook you up with some mortgage lenders, home inspectors, what have you, that you might need. We've got a whole stable full of referrals we can give you there. But the first thing is, if you're even interested at all about talking about buying or selling, call me, call one of our agents, and we'd love to sit down and talk to you about it. It is somewhat of a spring market, we still call it, in the summer months of approaching here in the next week or 2, but things are still hot here in Middle Tennessee. So give us a call at 615-327-4800.
Hey, thanks a bunch, Chip.
Thanks, Chris. Go Vandy. Let's get a tournament title. I'd love to see us win one this weekend and march on through to a regional and host for a long 2 weeks of baseball, and we'll see what happens after that.
Well, we'll be here to talk about it. He is Chip Fridrich. I'm Chris Lee, the host of the Vandy Sports Podcast. Thank you for listening. We've got several more episodes coming later in the week.